Have you ever wanted to play a game that accurately simulates the real-life experiences of the average low-income British neighbourhood?
Butter. Butter.
A game with varied enemy encounters like local youth with mum's kitchen knife, Shrek on performance-enhancing supplements, Ricky Berwick, and What the Dog Doing. A game that looks like you've just sneezed when your colostomy bag isn't on tight enough. Because if so, get your head checked, and Fallout 3 might just be the game for you. Just remember, Fallout 3 is like New Vegas, except not as good. The story of Fallout 3 begins 200 years after the events of the Great War. What is the Great War, you ask? Unimportant. That's what it is. Because when it comes to Fallout, sure there's interesting world building, sure there's fleshed out characters with believable motives and needs, sure there's environmental storytelling everywhere you look. But is it important? No, the game has a gun that lets you shoot literal trash. Nothing else is relevant. Beginning the game with a front row view of your mother's fallopian tubes, you're birthed out onto the table and immediately disappoint your parents as you kill your mother. But it's okay, your dad is Liam Neeson and the only thing that's been taken is the love of his life and his will to live. I name my character Player Name, and for some reason decide to make my character look like this, not realizing that it actually changes your father's appearance too, leaving me wishing that I could have gotten the double kill by falling out of his genitals as well. Right after this is where Fallout 3 opens up. And by opens up, I mean crams you into a miniature tin can buried beneath the earth, created by some guys at Vault-Tec that thought it would be a great idea to run different experiments in different vaults. Like secretly pumping psychedelic substances into the air, having 999 men and 1 woman, and having a vault entirely inhabited by children under the age of 16. And while we're on the subject of really good ideas with no negative side effects, let's talk about this game's introduction. It's boring, and brings back fond childhood memories by having you be bullied and forcing you to sit through an exam, until it's not boring anymore, and lets you murder your bully's mother right in front of him to assert your dominance. One day in the vault, you wake up and your father is nowhere to be seen. He's gone to the store for cigarettes and milk. Knowing that that means no child support payments will be coming your way anytime soon, you fly into a murderous rage, immediately leave your bedroom, and shoot a security guard in the head. To be fair, he did point his finger at me in a mildly threatening manner, leaving me no choice but to fight for my life. After you're done reducing the vault's overpopulation figures against the hard-working family men you've known since you were a child, in pursuit of your dad, you exit the vault and are introduced to the one-of-a-kind Bethesda-patented piss filter because the world has been tinted green for your immersive pleasure. And it was right about then, as I was trying to figure out who had just enacted an impromptu water sports session all over my screen, I realised that my game was entirely and utterly broken. Not just because it's a game created by Bethesda in their slave mines, where the employees are forced to use a game engine from 1997 and a handful of duct tape.
Who's laughing now?
But because it's a game created by Bethesda, and the physics are tied directly to your frame rate. It took me a while to catch on to this issue, and you'd think that the fact that my character was walking around at a speed that could only be described as extremely abnormal would be a dead giveaway. But when you play enough of Bethesda's open world games, you begin to turn a blind eye to the ungodly horrors that you witness, as the bugs and glitches are indeed intentional features and an integral part of the experience. After capping my frame rate to 60 like some kind of poor person, the first thing I do after leaving civilization and having my corneas irreversibly damaged is loot a frag grenade from the closest mailbox, as it appears the average American forgot about their Amazon order. After having a polite disagreement with one of the locals, I reach the first major settlement of the game, Megaton. And speaking of Amazon, much like the ridiculous working conditions in their factories, Megaton is faced with a similar conundrum as it's been built around an unexploded nuclear bomb. Except if you mess up here, you're not forced to urinate into plastic bottles while having your last breath of air squeezed out of you by billionaire Jeff Bezos and his robotic arms. Every trace of you and everyone else unfortunate enough to be around you simply ceases to exist. Remember those fleshed out characters with believable motives I mentioned earlier? Well, here's Lucas Sims, Megaton's sheriff. After bringing up the topic of the small issue pertaining to the undetonated live nuclear warhead in the middle of town, he tells you that he doesn't trust any of the locals to try and disarm it, before immediately agreeing to let you do it. It must be my charming good looks. Wanting to do a little more sightseeing around this accurate recreation of Birmingham, I bump into Moira.
Hey, I hear you're that stray from the vault.
Who upon hearing her voice, almost convinces me there and then that maybe flattening the area wouldn't be such a bad idea after all, until I remembered what my mother told me as a child. Patience is a virtue, and I can just kill that bitch later after I've taken her for everything she's got. And oh boy, am I glad I continued talking to Moira, because early on in the game, she'll send you off in various different directions around the map, increasing all of your potential areas to explore, because the Capital Wasteland is full of interesting and fun locations, full of their own unique stories. Like Andale, a quaint little peaceful town, where all of its members have resorted to inbreeding and cannibalism. Springvale Elementary School and its inhabitants' tremendous talent for interior design, and Minefield, a picturesque American suburb absolutely riddled with life-threatening landmines, while being filled to the brim with pre-war vehicles that emit a miniature nuclear explosion. I hear the Irish love this game. All the while it's overlooked by a trigger-happy psychotic geriatric gentleman. And while you're out on your sightseeing expeditions, wondering why half of the Capital Wasteland looks like modern-day Ohio, much like being in modern-day Ohio, you'll be consuming copious amounts of drugs, which much like in real life, has little to no negative side effects. And while you're out on your benders, you'll discover new areas, complete side quests, and cull the local population with the VAT system, essentially just a percentage-based aimbot, which will in turn lead to the accumulation of XP, which ultimately leads to questionable choices as you level up, like choosing the cannibal perk. And by questionable choices, I mean the right ones. Brain parasites are only a bad thing if you let them be a bad thing. But due to the nature of the game, chances are if you've ever done anything you want to change, you'll easily be able to reload as you've been rapidly save scumming, because Fallout 3 has this really cool and interesting feature where it crashes to desktop in 3-minute intervals to remind you to get up and do something productive with your life, like go out and get laid, or play New Vegas. All of this time that I could have spent searching for my father as he's out there alone in these brutal, desolate lands, but instead, I've been abusing the painfully black and white morality system that essentially boils down to do something bad and the scale goes this way, and do something good and the scale goes the other way. But much like I told my doctor, the scale is stupid and I hate it. I'm bulking. So in pursuit of the random morality thought I had of, I wonder what will happen if I do this, I'm approached by a man named Mr. Burke, who's employed by an eccentric rich guy named Tenpenny, who doesn't like the way Megaton looks from his ivory tower, despite it being completely out of the game's render distance with nothing in sight, and he wants it gone. You see, the game likes to ask these deep philosophical questions like, do you want to nuke an entire town full of people, and how would you feel about eliminating an entire race? First, I gather all the information I need from Megaton about Daddy's location, and then I blow it up for a little bit of pocket change. Did I just permanently remove a potentially bustling trade hub full of quests, characters, and items? Yes, I did. Do I care? No, I don't. Will I regret it later? Probably. It's okay. They were poor. Think of it as a really drawn-out post-birth abortion. As well as being a point-and-click narcotics hoarding simulator, pointing being aiming your weapon and clicking being firing your weapon, Fallout 3 is a role-playing game. And by Fallout 3 is a role-playing game, I mean you will play the role you're given, and you will like it, goddammit. But it's not about the destination, it's about the journey and the friends you make along the way. Which basically means, how can you exploit each and every situation to the point where you come out on top? Just like after I received my payment for my recent landscaping project, I was pulled aside and attempted to be sold on the concept of racial purity. Much like Megaton being an eyesore, Tenpenny is disgusted by a fact that a group of local ghouls would dare to attempt to seek safety and shelter in his well-fortified, heavily defended refuge. They look funny and must die. Seeing Tenpenny's disdain and outright racism of the Pinks as a potentially smart business move, using my right to freely go in and out of the tower as I please, I accidentally leave a basement door open and sit back and watch as each body hits the floor as it's more stuff for me to loot and sell. It's simple business really. Gain the trust of someone who has something I want, and then take them for everything they're worth at the first available opportunity. You can translate this philosophy to the rest of the game too. See someone with something you want, secretly kill them with no negative repercussions, and then profit. Just don't ask me how it's possible to loot a can of pork and beans from their meaty flesh sack afterwards. And don't ask me why it tastes funny now either. It's extra protein to go along with your botulism. Finally tracking your dad down to the convenience store, wondering why he's been taking so long buying cigarettes and milk, you find that he's gotten himself into quite the conundrum as he's been turned into a dog. Hidden beneath a vault is a simulation where all of the said vault's residents are being held against their will and being controlled by a psychopathic German man with questionable taste for his VR chat avatar. Those pesky Germans and their technology. Looking for information, your dad rolled into the vault, saw dozens of people hooked up to machines in fancy chairs and thought, that looks like a good idea. And not being one to continue the cycle of mistakes made by your parents, you do the exact same thing. Welcome to Tranquility Lane, a little idyllic slice of pre-war America with a healthy dose of psychotic sadism. Must be a German thing. The overseer of the vault, Braun, has been terrorizing all of the members for centuries on his own, but now that you've shown up, you can do it for him. And if you want your dad back, that's exactly what you need to do. You know, you could just find the hidden failsafe and get yourself out. But why do that when there's fun and productive activities to be done? Like making a small child cry by telling him his parents are getting divorced and it's all his fault, and splitting up a marriage for entertainment purposes. But it's okay, you shouldn't feel bad. Just like Mexico, love is a made-up idea. And the grand finale in your prepubescent child form, donning a mask and using a kitchen knife to become the pint-sized slasher, and brutally massacring an entire town. Also for entertainment purposes. Good times. Surprisingly, despite this being the most fun the strange German man with questionable ethics has had in years, he actually sticks to his word and frees both you and your father. But not everyone else though, screw those guys. Turns out that Dad was after a GECK, a Garden of Eden creation kit, a device created by Braun that has terraforming abilities, and a device that would be perfect for creating non-irradiated water for the people of the wasteland, so babies can stop being born and growing up to become podcast bros. And also, Dad somehow knows that I nuked Megaton for selfish reasons, like I wanted to see what would happen, despite anyone who was involved in that whole process being very dead, and mildly tells me off for it like he's not angry, but just really disappointed. Sorry Dad, while you're too busy trying to save the world and ensure the safety of the next generation, I'm out here doing what I've got to do to stay alive, because the Capital Wasteland is a place filled with drug fiends and psychopaths with automatic weaponry, kinda like modern day America. And not long after you're reunited with Liam Neeson, he's taken again, but this time he's taken to the permanent convenience store in the sky to perpetually buy milk and cigarettes. All because of a faction known as the Enclave showed up and said, "No mine." Dad of the year. Not only does he leave me alone with no one who loves me as I tore my mother's vagina open with my fat head, but he's so petty that he'd literally kill himself out of spite and everyone inside of the chamber so they can't take his work. The Enclave being the lost remnants of the pre-war government, making what Dad did not so bad actually. I too would kill myself in front of the government. After being evacuated to the Brotherhood of Steel, basically the Enclave, but not, using their terminal, you're able to track down a fully working GECK in a vault somewhere, but there's a little problem. Standing between you and that GECK are some of the most disgusting, foul creatures to ever step foot on Earth. Children. Little Lamplight is a settlement blocking the entrance to the vault, and you can't get in because the kids are extremely xenophobic, but to big people.
Don't take another step or we'll blow your fucking head off.
Okay, just give me 1 second. After a long hard back and forth, I eventually convinced the mayor to let me in their settlement by simply asking nicely. Because they're stupid fucking kids. And once I'm in, with free reign to go wherever I may please, I proceed to rob the place absolutely blind, before abusing the percentage-based pickpocketing system to steal all my money back. Because once again, stupid fucking kids. And because of that percentage-based system that carries over to other mechanics, as well as just other kleptomaniac-adjacent activities, Fallout 3 is the type of game where you can talk yourself into situations, and talk yourself out of situations. And you might think that there would be some sort of skill involved with that. And you'd be right. The skill of reloading an autosave until you get the desired result. After being the strong, respectable role model that these children need, I make it to the vault where the GECK is located and discover that this vault has been used to create asexual mutant abominations. Because as it turns out, super mutants, much like Romanians, were created in a lab and are the result of a failed science experiment. And much like Romanians, have a natural resistance to radiation, which comes in incredibly handy when we meet our good friend Forks, who's gracious enough to wade through the toxic chemicals of radiation to retrieve the GECK for me, as he prefers his friends to not violently puke and diarrhea out their own organs. And by good friend Forks, I mean he isn't my friend. Because despite him being locked in this vault for close to 200 years, he somehow knows I inverted an entire city and isn't exactly fond of that. But with the GECK finally in my possession, it's time to complete my father's final wishes and install a Fiji water dispenser. But before I can do that, once again the Enclave swoop in as all of the hard work has already been done and perform one of the most devious of licks. They're kinda good at that. I guess just like the real government, the Enclave too are ethically bankrupt. I wake up in their stronghold with the GECK no longer in my possession, before being let free as the literal president of the United States wants to have a little chat with me. But much like my ex-girlfriend, I somehow do something to offend his almighty, and he immediately tries to have me murdered for absolutely no reason. So in a purely self-defense manner, I proceed to kill literally everyone and everything, including the unarmed scientists, because much like the elderly, they're expendable. After I'm done breaking multiple Geneva Convention rules, purely for self-defense reasons, I meet the President of the United States, an AI. He explains to me all of his silly little ideas, and just like someone on Twitter, desperately tries to explain all of his creepy behavior away. So I talk him into downloading some free RAM from this strange Russian website, and initiate the self-destruct sequence. After talking the leader of a militaristic superpower into defeat, like the bottom he is, I head back to the Brotherhood of Steel, and sit back and relax as the final stretch of the main quest now becomes a walking simulator. With the help of the Iron Giant, the Brotherhood begin their engagement to retake Project Purity, with the simple strategy of throwing nukes at everything until it stops moving. Something that must be a viable militaristic strategy, because the Americans have already done it. Twice. After trying their best to impersonate an immovable object, but failing as they're met by an unstoppable force, the Enclave, much like the crusty sock you keep hidden away from your family, are filled with green goo. Because this is a video game, filled to the brim with top-notch, unmatched, excellent writing, like the feminist ally I am, I convince a high-ranking female member of the Brotherhood of Steel to kill herself because I said so. With the main quest now complete, only with a minor loss of life, it's time to do the expansions. And by do the expansions, I mean do the expansions later. Because right now, it's time to do the thing of most importance in Fallout 3. Save your father. Hardly. Provide clean drinking water to the wasteland. Not really. Free innocent children from slavery. No thank you. Forge an inseparable, lifelong friendship with one of man's best friends. Yes. We head to the location where Dogmeat is supposed to be to discover that he's had a little oopsie again and brutally murdered 2 people. With Dogmeat clearly out on his walkies right now, we teleport to him using console commands and are immediately dropped right in front of a Deathclaw. After killing that bad boy together, me and Good Boy join forces and decide to go on a little bonding adventure together to steal the Declaration of Independence, a piece of paper that originally belonged to a bunch of traitors. After we get all American on the super mutants in the way, we take the document from an incredibly patriotic robot who's willing to die for it, before giving it to some random guy who asked for it. We tell a small, terrified child that he's leveled up to the rank of orphan, and that his father was brutally mauled to death by giant fire ants, before gate-crashing an important government building, absolutely filled to the brim with abominations, hell-bent on the world's destruction. The White House. After we're done enacting some long overdue revenge for the Japanese, we decide to take a nice relaxing stroll full of self-reflection and self-care because I deserve it. Thinking that I should really wear sunglasses next time I decide to obliterate an entire civilization for bus money, suddenly I spot something in the distance, causing my neurodivergence to kick in and run straight towards it. I was deceived. I'm separated from Dogmeat and beamed up into an alien spaceship to start the Mothership Zeta expansion. And much like the average Roman ruler from back in the day, human rights are merely a suggestion, and I have things put inside me. But now I'm angry. Dogmeat is all alone back down there on Earth, free to harvest the organs of disfigured wasteland children, and I can't watch. So after waking up in a cell with a roommate, I deduce that this situation can be resolved like most disagreements back in the real world. Jump them. After punching them in their stupid small little green heads, I free a little girl who Dogmeat would like, and who's been here for hundreds of years and knows the ship very well, because apparently an ancient advanced race of aliens capable of things beyond our basic human comprehension can be brought to its knees by little Sally. Now I'm not saying that people with a green complexion have a lower IQ, but after the aliens made the incredibly intellectually stimulating choice of keeping all my belongings nearby, I proceed to stimulate them. Stimulate them right in their stupid faces. It was about here when I was introduced to Mothership Zeta's diverse cast of characters. Little girl, 3 Americans, Japanese man, alien, and then alien again, but this time with more HP. And after prying incredibly overpowered alien weaponry from their greasy dead green hands, there was absolutely nothing that was gonna stop me. Except oxygen. Or should I say lack of it. Clearly the guys over at Bethesda thought you'd be running through this DLC just a little bit too fast, so they decided to remedy that by breaking your fucking legs. What sounds like it's going to be an incredibly fun idea on paper, going on a spacewalk to see the sights, actually turns out to be nothing more than walking incredibly slowly through a vast open void of nothingness to activate a bunch of panels. A section of the game that's about as riveting as draining the cyst on my left testicle, and a section of the game that I only learnt after the fact was incredibly slow because I accidentally changed out of my power armor, losing a bunch of carry weight in the process. Bad game, please fix Todd. So as I'm sure you can understand, upon completing the area, I proceed to remove my spacesuit, for my cranium to then make an emergency evacuation through my eye socket, and you can imagine my delight upon figuring out that my last save was before the spacewalk. Because of this ever so slight inconvenience I'm faced with, I decide to release the human alien abominations they've been creating to brutally massacre the unarmed workers. The unarmed workers that I somehow get negative karma for allowing to die, because I guess they're just kidnapping and mutilating people, but in a nice way. As we're navigating this huge alien spaceship on the orders of a literal 8-year-old, I accidentally stumble across a giant planet-destroying death ray before accidentally firing the giant planet-destroying death ray directly at Earth. But it's okay, crisis averted, the blast only hit Albania. And Albanians aren't real. Blame that incident on the little girl, and then head up to the bridge for a nice friendly chat with the captain, and respectfully disagree to his forced amputation requests, and create an awful lot of green alien widows back wherever it is these slimy green pricks came from. That is, unless they're asexual beings capable of parthenogenesis, dedicated to the doctrine of no fap, with no time for these hoes. Once they're dealt with, another alien spaceship appears and aims directly at us, starting the final encounter and the big bad boss of the Mothership Zeta expansion that consists of riveting gameplay mechanics like push button to win. And win I did, because I don't think it's physically possible to lose this fight. After taking orders from a little girl and overthrowing an advanced race of alien species, it's time to go from shooting things in bland space corridors to shooting things in bland Earth corridors. Because there just aren't enough toilets to drink from up here, and strange environmental storytelling being told in the bathrooms. Because if you didn't know this already, Bethesda has mandatory meetings detailing that if a toilet exists in their game, then an employee must put a skeleton in it or face being fired. After making it back to Earth, in typical Bethesda fashion, I find Dogmeat searching for infants to consume, but in the ground. It's me, Dogmeat, and my mysterious stranger schizophrenia friend who likes to show up from time to time, and a backpack full of high-tech alien weaponry that I'm gonna use on a bunch of poor people. But something isn't quite right. I've got all of this high-tech weaponry, but no high-tech drip. The fit must be completed by any means necessary. So what that means is heading to the underworld to receive a quest. The underworld being a city run by ghouls. In other words, Detroit. After peacefully resolving the questline by politely asking people for their keys, I'm able to enter a facility, detonate a nuclear warhead, and find the armor. I didn't need to detonate the warhead, I just did it on accident. Oh well, because now I can look exactly the same as I did before, but now in a tint of green. At least I'll be the hottest girl on my vacation, as Dogmeat follows me on a nice scenic cruise through the wastes, immediately followed by Dogmeat not following me. Alone, dogless, but still kinda cute though, I arrive at Point Lookout, an accurate recreation of an average British coastal town. You've got the incestuous locals, the radioactive puddles, and the overwhelming smell of sheer and utter depression. What's a girl gotta do to get a mojito around here? Well, apparently, walk up to the big mansion at the top of the hill, as it's the only thing of note in the area, and help its current owner Desmond repel a bunch of local tribals that we refer to as the undesirables. After we get to talking and bond over our mutual likeness for killing the lower class, I agree to help him figure out why exactly they keep trying to kill this peaceful old man who's only killed a couple dozen of them, a few times. My orders are simple: infiltration and reconnaissance. But to do that, we must first get high as fuck in a swamp. So high the game crashes apparently. We're let into the Tribals group after smoking that Zaza, and pretty easily discover that the Tribals are worshipping a sentient brain with a serious grudge against Desmond. A sentient brain that tries to convince me to take his side, but I kinda like the way Desmond talks all sweet to me.
Of course I fucking want you to do something else. You don't expect me to trot around this mud hole myself, do you?
And on the way back to Desmond, just like in the average British coastal town, his house suddenly explodes from a shoddy gas pipe installation, as apparently that's something the brain was capable of doing this entire time, instead of sending groups of people with the combined IQ of 7 to do the deed for him. And apparently it's taken this long for Desmond to realise that Mr. Brain has been residing a mere 50 feet away because Fallout 3 has god-tier writing. In this world, there are smart men and there are stupid men. Desmond somehow manages to be both of them. So we break into his residence and politely put this matter behind us before I realise that I don't really want to be here anymore. It really is like the average British coastal town, but as I'm on my way out, I discover that the boat captain that brought me here has been performing secret little lobotomies on people as they lay unconscious from the tribal ritual for not being able to handle their drugs. Thinking that my head had been feeling slightly lighter as of late, I decided to perform a little impromptu brain surgery of my own, because no one goes poking around in my holes as I sleep. At least not for free anyway. Speaking of being fondled in my sleep, it's time to find and immediately leave dog meat behind again, because like any good absent father would do, you've got to keep them on their toes. Operation Anchorage is the next expansion of the game, and a true-to-life virtual reality experience. Working with the Brotherhood Outcasts, you enter a simulation to play a video game inside of a video game, and much like VR chat, you run around in a virtual make-believe world, getting accosted by the Chinese. The Outcasts have discovered a bunker full of supplies, and the only way to get the door open is to not use the pre-established mechanics of the game, like lockpicking or hacking, but instead by completing a pre-war training program against the slaves of the PUBG mines. That can only be accessed with the Pip-Boy on your arm, which results in the lock being disengaged. The simulation begins with you spawning in and immediately shooting Chinese people, which is highly unrealistic because I'm not their government. But I am a guy with the Gauss rifle, or as I like to call, the fun gun. An advanced sniper rifle that puts its enemies in an advanced state of death as it systematically detaches its target's body parts as they won't be needing them any longer. Operation Anchorage is an exciting expansion that incorporates a handful of new features into the game, like detonating yourself into a fiery abyss in order to ensure the crippling defeat of your enemies, but on accident, handcrafting and commanding your own strike team that does absolutely nothing, and war crimes. The simulation of the Americans versus the Chinese communists, claiming to be an accurate representation of the liberation of Anchorage, supposedly one of the greatest battles in the Fallout universe, according to its wiki page, essentially meaning that it's canon that in Fallout history, that one lunatic kept accidentally blowing himself up repeatedly after grossly misjudging the size of the blast radius. See, we know that the Chinese are communists because they all die, but together. And they keep begging you for food, but that's neither here nor there. The epic battle that sees you killing Chinese person, and killing Chinese person but invisible, comes to its dramatic conclusion with you convincing the attacking general of the Chinese army to commit seppuku by simply asking him to do so, because the Americans are just that badass. And once it's done, you log out of Habbo Hotel for the day, and the armory is open, and you get first dibs. Except not really, because as soon as you exit the armory, you're immediately betrayed by the very people you just helped, right after they were foolish enough to give you a Gauss rifle and the strongest power armor in the game. In other words, a grave miscalculation. Judging by the fact that they wanted that Gauss rifle for themselves so badly, I decided to go and take it to them at their base so they could see it up close in action. Because the thing is, I'm a petty man, and I took that personally. And it's a good thing that dog meat seems to really like the taste of backstabbing traitor, because when he's got a ravenous, insatiable case of the zoomies, there's no stopping him. And while we're out and about, fucking literally everybody's day up, for no other reason than I was mildly offended, I come across a guy named Werner, a former high-ranking member amongst a faction known as the Pitt Raiders. A group of people who view ethics as nothing more than a slight annoyance, who by using the ancient Egyptian methods of forcing people to work against their will and cutting off various body parts if they refuse, have managed to create a city. A city that I'm somehow convinced to help liberate. And by help liberate, I mean I give myself up into slavery for a man who doesn't actually care about the slaves and just wants to run things himself because he doesn't like the current ruler very much. But hey, who am I to judge? If you want a city built, then a few children are gonna be permanently, physically and mentally crippled in the process, because child labour makes the world go round. After making it into Disney World and having a little look around, much like the real Disney World, I'm not too surprised to see that they have a dedicated spot for public executions and punishments for the people who try to skip the lines. Surprisingly, the methods for containment that includes cramming as many people as feasibly possible into a small, damp, unhygienic place has resulted in its fair share of disease and sickness. They range from relatively benign cases, such as bacterial vaginosis, hep C and prostate cancer, which can all be cured with the help of essential oils and healing crystals, to much like the British monarchy, straight up being turned into a violent flesh-eating abomination known as a trog. And if you do a little bit of poking around in the area where the short king manlets reside, you'll come across an absolutely devastating unique melee weapon called the Man Opener, which again, much like the British monarchy, has absolutely no problem in tearing anything and everything to shreds in a brutally violent and horrific manner. It's not my usual method for getting inside of a man, but it'll do. In the city known as the Pitt, there isn't exactly much that can be described as entertainment, apart from the odd industrial machinery accident involving children, so it's no surprise really that the next logical step for its occupants would be to start their own gladiatorial arena and watch the bottom of society tear each other to pieces with military weaponry. And while the poor killing each other for the sake of fun is enough on its own, there needs to be a driving force to persuade people to take part. And that driving force is a chance at freedom. So that's exactly what I do. Show up, kill literally everyone, and then have my freedom given to me pretty much on the exact same day I had it taken from me. As well as being granted my freedom, I'm given an audience with the leader of the Pitt Raiders, someone who just so happens to have figured out a cure for the little trog problem. his genitals. The leader's daughter was born with a genetic mutation that causes them to be immune to the disease. So wondering what baby would taste like, and a cure would probably turn the tides for the slaves, I kidnap the baby and blow up both of its parents, because stealing babies is somewhat of a recreational hobby of mine. My cannibal perk doesn't seem to be working, so after doing something that I've always wanted to do, starting a slave uprising, I then release an army of trogs into said uprising, before giving the baby to some random dude as my job is done. Somehow killing both of a child's parents in the same room as it and ripping it away from its home is probably the least morally grey thing my character's done. Once again, dog meat has become one with the Earth's crust, and at this point, it's about tidying things up. I've got one more expansion to tick off the list. An expansion that arguably makes the most sense to do first, but an expansion that I did last. Broken Steel, a continuation of the main story's questline that sees you once again working with the Brotherhood of Steel, but this time to do some political cleansing, otherwise known as genocide. Made even better due to the fact that dog meat can finally come with me. Because remember kids, mass homicide is best enjoyed with a friend. The expansion begins with Optimus Prime's defeat, and is now up to the player to face the danger ahead and wipe the Decepticons from existence. It sees you first heading through the abandoned town of New Jersey, inhabited by a pack of unloved and misunderstood Deathclaws, because there's no such thing as a bad Deathclaw, just bad Deathclaw owners. The situation is best dealt with in any way you deal with any hard situations in real life. Throw wads of cash at it until it goes away. And thanks to the rocket launcher, a weapon I've had the schematics to build since way back with Moira, I can quite literally do just that. And once I get bored of participating in one of my favourite pastimes, throwing cash at poor people, I steal a Tesla coil, and in a fashion I'm sure Nikola Tesla would approve of himself, obsessively, compulsively fire particle-accelerated beams into the heads of my enemies. Thanks to a highly autistic member of the World of Tanks community who leaked a confidential file online detailing how I can turn it into a weapon just so they can win an online argument. Based. After instantly vaporizing hundreds of Enclave soldiers who just want to get back to the warm embrace of their wives and children, we storm their final Enclave installation and reprogram their anti-aircraft cannons to fire on themselves. You'd think that there would probably be some kind of anti-suicide failsafe in place to prevent depressed, disgruntled anti-aircraft operators from going postal and doing just that, but thanks to poor health and safety precautions, the capital wasteland is now free of a brutal militaristic faction and replaced by a different brutal militaristic faction. And after a long, arduous 31 minutes and 50 seconds, Dogmeat and I were happy enough to just sit back and consume the copious amount of jet I'd manically stockpiled through my playthrough. But then something happened. We meet a group of freaky tree god worshippers that look like they drink petrol for its medicinal effects, so decides to absolutely obliterate them with facts and logic by telling them how stupid their god is. But in order to meet this mysterious god, I must first participate in a ceremony of purification. Do more tree drugs. Again. But the joke's on them. I'm not sure there's much brain left to steal in there. The last guy was kinda greedy about it. After waking up, swearing I'm still tripping, I see Nigel Farage in tree form. After he's done telling me how he thinks asylum seekers should be drowned in the North Sea, he tells me his name is Harold, and that there's someone inside of him called Bob who won't get out. At this point, Harold is hundreds of years old, trapped in place, and Bob, starting off as nothing more than a twig, has slowly but surely infested his insides, pushing all of his organs out of place. Funny. Same thing happened to me last time a guy called Bob was in me. Harold wants to die, but thanks to his followers, having an unfortunate yet persistent case of terminally stupid, they misconstrued everything that Harold says as a series of riddles that they must solve, when in reality, he's living in a state of continuous morning wood, and it's starting to go numb. Without even buying me a drink first, he tells me that I must go deep inside of him to fondle his internal organs. He wants me to find his heart, and to blow it up for a quick painless death. But feeling rather morally ambiguous about taking orders from a filthy ent, I set his face on fire with a flamethrower because of my pathological demand avoidance. I love the smell of burning firewood. Here's one more for good measure. Now I can finally play Fallout 3 the way that it was meant to be played. With all the sex mods.